Mare Nostrum Empires. This is the second edition of Mare Nostrum. I haven't played the first, so I cannot compare. Mare Nostrum Empires is a game for 3 to 5 players. It is set in a sort of fantastic version of the ancient Mediterranean area, because you have Caesar and Cleopatra and Hannibal, yes, but then you also have Gilgamesh and Hercules and Perseus and all of these other figures that all come together seamlessly. It is a game that is kind of like a 4X game with expand, exterminate, exterminate and expand. You do not do much exploring because the board is clearly defined at the beginning. You do not have a technological tree. It is a game that has to do with collecting resources, improving your empire. Each player controls one of the ancient empires in the area. So you collect resources, you create an engine that generates wealth for you, and you use it to build armies, cities, temples, and things like that. The army aspect is particularly important because even if you are not planning to expand by violent means, other players might, and the board is fairly large physically, but functionally is a board where the players elbow each other easily, and sooner or later your opponents will be pressuring you from the borders. So even if you are the Pacific player, you still need to defend yourself, you still need to create an army. And in truth, in most cases, this is a game that, yes, it's about resources, management, and creating an economic engine, but there will be some fight involved. There will be combat. So it's not a war game. I would say it's a hybrid. It's a hybrid between a Euro game and a war game. It's about Academy Games, so that alone is something that made me pretty excited because I enjoyed all the previous games by them that they play. So chances were that I would enjoy this one. The themes seem interesting, the presentation is beautiful, so this game had a lot of things that made me very hopeful, that gave me the sense that I would really enjoy this game. Did the game keep its promise? Did the game meet the expectations that I had, which are fairly high? We'll talk about this in the conclusions of this video, but now let's have a closer look at the game. The game is played on this board that represents the Mediterranean area and the immediate east. It is a very nice looking map, and we'll have a closer look at it later. Now I want to show you two other parts of the game. Here there is another mini board that contains the tracks for the trade leader, the cultural leader, and the military leader. During the game there will be tokens belonging to the players here based on the shifting of certain values. The role of leader in the 3 categories will change during the game, and being the leader in each category gives you advantages because you get to decide the order in which players go in certain parts of the turn. Here we have another board, another mounted board, which is used to show some player rates there with those icons, but mainly to store these tokens here that represent heroes and wonders. These are special tiles that the players can purchase. They're quite expensive, but they also come with special abilities and benefits that they lend. Each tile has a different one, so it may take a while to learn all of the effects and advantages that these tiles give. One way to do so that the game recommends is you start with only 5 tiles face up, the other ones face down, so players familiarize themselves with those, and then when a tile is purchased, another tile is flipped face up, made available, players learn about that, and so on and so forth. Once you're proficient with the game, you can play with all of these tiles, increasingly the number of options the players have. Now, what you see here is the board for 5 players. When you have 5 players, use the entire board. When you have only 4 players, you only use part of the map, and to identify the part of the map that you use, you place this mini board here, right here, like that, and now you have the 4-player board. The board for the leader in the category covers the parts that you do not need in a 4-player game. And guess what you do with in a 3-player game? You slide this down, you place this at the board here, and voila! These boards cover the parts that you do not need in a 3-player game. So this is how the board looks in a 3-player game. When I realized that these boards were useful in themselves, it could be used to cover the parts of the board based on the number of players, I was really impressed. That's some attention to detail right there. That's some commitment to a good design. Now let's have a look at the map a little up close. The map, as you can see, is divided in land areas and sea areas, and there are all of those icons on the map that for the most part indicate buildings that the players can build, and also controlled areas where they may place the control tokens. Each player has a capital area, and that's why the control token is printed there, because it cannot be removed. Then you also have some control tokens that you will place in areas that have that banner there when the banner is empty, so you can gain control. Also, you gain control by stealing that area from other people, so you remove their banner and you place yours. There are these icons here, those are caravans, and the symbols that you see on the map don't represent stuff that is there already, but stuff that you can build. So, for example, I can build 2 caravans in this area, and I can build a caravan in this one. Once a caravan is built, so the caravan produces the associated resource, like olive oil, sheep, gladiators, and different types of things. As you can see, there are also market symbols. If I build a market, it doubles the production of resources for that area. So now when that area produces resources, which is the beginning of a turn, will produce 2 sheep and 2 olive oils, or 2 units of olive oil. We also have cities and temples. Cities and temples work in a similar way. It is just that they produce coins instead of raw resources. You can build those cities. There's a legendary city. It works in a slightly different way from the other cities. It is also at the center of one of the victory conditions that is legendary cities are. You can recognize it because of the red edge. But in general, you place a marker there to indicate that you did build a city, and the city produces the number of coins that you see associated with it, which is usually 1. You may add a temple, and a temple will double the number of coins that are produced in that resource. The area around Athens is particularly good for that, because you can build 2 cities there that produces 2 coins, and with a temple that means 4 coins per. Other things that you can bring to the 4 military units that you can build and place on the map. There are 3 types of military units: legions, represented by these heads, helmets, triremes, and fortresses. Now, how does the game work? Well, actually, one more thing as an introduction. Each player also has a board of this kind with a starting tile that represents the leader of that party or that faction. So each player has a tile with unique abilities, and here you have an area where you place other tiles of the kind that I showed you earlier, those tiles there, when you acquire them. As you can see, there is a Laurel of Victory in the 5th slot, because if you have acquired 5 heroes, you win the game. One of the victory conditions is to acquire a 5th hero. Now, how does the game work? At the beginning of each turn, the players all together collect resources. So they simply take commodities, and they take money from the caravans, the marketplaces, and the cities that they control. Now, as I showed you earlier, you can have many types of resources. Actually, there are 13 types of commodities available. As you can see here, the variety from wheat, sheep, ice cones. I know they're not, but from a distance they look like ice creams, and that's how we call them. That's grapes though. Marble, diamonds, and so on and so forth. So 13 available commodities. At the beginning of the turn, collecting resources. All players collect the resources simultaneously. Then players get to trade resources. And back to those tracks. The player that has the majority of caravans and marketplaces and symbols, that kind of symbol that may come from tiles, for example, sometimes we'll give you that symbol. The player is the leader on that track. The player that is the leader decides how many resources the players will offer for trade that turn. And that can be between 0 and 5 players, so then have to take an equal number of those resources from behind their screen, their personal screen, and offer it for trade. They had to put it in front of the screen and offer it to other players. And so you're trying to offer things that you don't need too much, but it may also be a good idea to offer things that are somewhat in demand, because there's an advantage when players want to trade with you. Once all players have put out the number of resources decided by the trade leader, starting with the trade leader, they trade resources, which is done in a very abstract way. The trade leader looks at the resources around and says, I like that resource in front of your screen, and takes it. The player that the leader took from looks around and says, I like that resource, and takes another resource. The player that just had a resource taken then goes out and selects the resources. You don't have to go in turn order, you don't have to go in a round. Players can trade in different order as long as two players don't trade twice in a row from each other. So this way, you continue like this until all resources have been assigned. It feels a little abstract, sometimes a little random, but it's a way for you to get some resources that otherwise you would not have. Because not just the number of resources that you gain, but the type of resources that you gain is super important. Then we go to the build phase. Here we use the player rate, so you see the build phase is right there. The culture leader this time determines the order in which players build. So one player does all their buildings, and the players get to see what the player does, and then the next player goes, as decided by the culture leader, who can decide to choose him or herself to go first or in any other order. Those are the things that you can build, and the price that you have to pay. The price you can pay entirely in coins. If you have coins, something costs 3, then I'll pay 3 coins, or you can pay the cost for something that you build in commodities, but they have to be different commodities, not duplicates. So if something costs 3, I can use 3 coins, but I cannot use 3 wheats, or not even 2 wheats and a gladiator, unless there is a special ability that allows me to do so. One of the leaders can do that. That would be illegal. In most cases, if something costs 3, then I need 3 of different resources with no duplicates, which is easy for things that cost 3. Is a little more complicated when you're trying to build more expensive things. You can build the Triremes, which you place in areas of the sea adjacent to areas you control. Legions or fortresses you place in areas that you control. Cities, caravans, again in areas that you control, and you can buy control. You do not necessarily need to acquire control by military means. If you are adjacent to an area that has no control, then you simply spend 3 to build, and you place one of your control banners in one of the banner areas. Basically, the idea is that first you take control of an area, then you start building other things. But when you're taking control from other players, then you need to fight for it. Well, if there is an area that is empty, nobody wants, then for 3 you're adjacent to that area, for 3 coins or different resources, you can buy control. For 6 coins or different resources, you can buy a temple or market. That is a thing that double the money or the commodities respectively. With 7 to 10 resources or coins, you buy a new hero or a new wonder. The price changes because as you can see from your personal maths, the more heroes you have, the more expensive the next one is going to be. The second costs 8, 7, then the third 8, and so on and so forth. So that's for the build phase. Players build all that they can. Then we get to the move and battle one. Players get to move their military units, and then they resolve battle. When, after movement, there are triremes of more than one player in an area, in that area there may be a battle, it's not mandatory, but when there are legions of multiple players in the same area after movement, then there is a battle. And now is the military leader, so the leader with the majority of triremes, legions, fortresses, and triangle symbols on the board that decides the order. The player decides the order and says, okay, you, player number 1, go and move. And that player can move their military units around. The land units move by 1. Sea units move by 1, and actually sea units move before military units. And sea units, once they are in the sea, they can act as bridges. Think of them as bridges. So first you move your your sea units and maybe resolve combat, if that is the case, if you have a chance and you decide to. Then you move your land units, which can move to an adjacent land unit or to an adjoining land area using a bridge of ships. And again, if after that movement there are multiple units of the same, multiple land units of the same player in an area, they will have to fight. Now, combat, super simple. You use two types of dice. Blue dice are used for sea battles and white dice for land battles. It's really simple. You roll a die for each unit that you have in the fight. So I have a trireme, then I roll 1. Plus you may get die from other game effects. So you roll, and suppose I have 2 triremes. You roll, you total the result. In this case I have 6. You divide the result by 5, and that is the number of units that the opponent loses. So in this sea battle, I've inflicted 1 hit on the opponent to destroy an enemy trireme. The same for land battles, again, but this time you roll these dice, the white dice, 1 per unit involved. There are several military leaders that will give you benefits and bonuses. For example, Caesar gives you a +1 on your die rolls when he's the attacker, when he's the active player. You roll. You total the result. You divide the total by 5, and again the result is number of enemy units that is destroyed. An important piece is fortresses. If you are fighting a land battle in a fortress, the fortress negates 1 hit that is inflicted on you and also inflicts 5 automatic points. Well, it counts as 5 automatic points against the opponent. So if you're defending with a fortress, you roll your dice as usual and then you add 5 for the fortress and you ignore the first hit. And that's how you adjust the number of military units on the board. Or if you're wondering why there are different types of dice, the sea dice only have numbers between 2 and 5, as you can see here from the 5 statistics, with 3 and 4 being repeated, and land battles have numbers from 3 to 6, and 3 and 4 are the numbers that are repeated. Then we have the claim leadership battle. Throughout the entire turn, players will be adjusting their stats as they acquire symbols and resources, they build stuff, stuff is destroyed, but only at the end do they adjust the leadership. At the end of the turn, you adjust the leadership for each track. After you have been moving things up and down, you place a token of the leader that is on top of each track there to indicate the new, or maybe the old leader still is there, but in any case to indicate the current leader for trade, culture, and the military. Actually, something that I didn't tell you, something an important aftermath of battle, what happens if you do conquer an enemy area. So you do conquer an area that belongs to the opponent. You are there with your units and the opponent doesn't have any units. Then as a conqueror you can do one of 3 things. You can pillage the area. This is something that you do if you don't think that you'll be able to hold the area for long. So you simply want to damage the opponent before the opponent takes the area back. And you simply pillage an area. To pillage an area, you destroy a city, or you can destroy a caravan and you get the associated benefit. If I destroy a city, I get a coin. If I destroy a caravan, I get the commodity associated with it. I may destroy a temple, which doesn't give me any immediate benefits, but when the opponent takes it back, having lost a temple or having lost a market means that the opponent will not be able to double the benefits that comes from that area. So pillaging is good for quick damage to the opponent and quick grab of resources. You may also try to actually use the resources of the opponent if you think you can hold the area for a while, and maybe you cannot control it. You cannot steal control from an opponent if it is not in an area adjacent or adjoining one of your areas. So maybe I just want to use that city, sit on top of that city, and for as long as I do so and the opponent does not dislodge me from there, I'll simply get the benefit for that city every turn. The same if I'm sitting on a caravan. Then I get the associated commodity. Finally, you may try to take control from an opponent. So if you're in an area where the opponent has a control banner, then you sit on that token, and if you do so until next turn, and again the area is adjacent or adjoining an area that you control, then you turn that control banner into a control banner that belongs to you. Well, not that one. Let's say this one. And as for the victory conditions, you win in one of several ways. You win by having 5 heroes or wonders. You win by building the pyramids. They are particularly expensive resource to build. It is always available from the beginning of the game. You win if during the claim leadership phase, you're the leader in all 3 categories. Your marker is on top of the tracks in all 3 of these tracks. You're the leader in culture, military, and trade. Also, you win if you take control of any 4 capitals and or legendary cities. Legendary cities are Syracuse, Jerusalem, which is not on this map here right now, with 3 players, and then we have Troy, and that would be with more players. That is one of the legendary cities. So any 4 capitals and or legendary cities, that also you win the game. So a lot of different ways of winning the game. This game is excellent. This game is superb. This game has to be one of the best Euro war game or wargamey Euro that I have ever played. The first comparison that comes to mind is Game of Thrones, the board game, which is a game that I love immensely. I don't get to play very often because it's fairly complex, so it takes quite a while to teach it to new players, and they have to be committed players. It takes very long to play. Some other players report playing it in 2 or 3 hours. My games always lasted 5 to 6 hours. So it's a game that I like, but it has complexity and very long time to play that go against it. Mare, Nostrum, and Pious reminds me of that game and shows me and brings to the table all the things that I like about that game. Precisely, an interesting economic engine, an interesting political element, an element of manipulating factors on the board so that you can affect the order in which players do things, which is super important. Sort of relative position on economic and political tracks that has a huge effect. But it's like everything that Game of Thrones, the board game, does with 5 rules and 7 procedures, this one does with half a rule and 1 procedure. It is just economic, it is just very... It's a game that is designed for effect, and boy, are these effects good. That is, it is a game that is fairly simple. Well, it's not Candyland. You still are going to play it mainly with hobby gamers rather than completely casual gamers, but it's not a game that gives a headache to gamers to learn. It is a game that after a couple of turns feels very intuitive. Probably the most complex thing is learning all the effects of the various heroes and monuments, but you really do not have to worry about that the first turn or 2. You just tell players, well, at the beginning, in any case, you probably should buy Caravans and create a solid economic engine, solidify your borders. Then once you figure it out, you'll start looking at the player rates and learn about the game effects. So it is a game that is not difficult, it is not complex, complicated to teach, it's not complex procedurally, but then it is a game that is very deep, and it is deep in an economic way, in an elegant way, almost minimalistic. When you compare the short rulebook that you have and the depth, the abysmal depth that the design has, well, then you definitely this is textbook elegance. Elegance to me is precisely this pleasant disproportion between simple mechanics and marvelously complex and nuanced gameplay, which is what you have here. The interaction among the players is fun and intense. You do have a diplomatic aspect, which is not necessarily mandatory. You could just do your own business, but if the other players are making deals against you or forming alliances against you, and even worse, they're then sticking to those alliances. They're actually doing what they were they promised to do, because no deals are binding. Well, then, of course, if you're the player that is not doing diplomacy and the other players are, and everybody's pounding you from all directions, things become tough. So the diplomatic element is not one that has any specific rules. There's a paragraph about that, but it happens. The design leads the players to that state of mind in which they see the value working organically with other players. And this is really what the game does in so many other respects. You have simple rules that almost very naturally, very organically lead you to certain courses of action, to consider certain strategies, to implement certain strategies. At all levels, every element of the turn is simply very functional, works very well, brings challenges. Even the simplest one, even something as simple as the trade phase, which is very abstract, mind you, but you still have the trade leader that may go for 0 trades for that turn, so you freeze the market, and that can be pretty powerful when other players really wanted to do a lot of trading this turn, or you wanted to keep your stuff and now you're forced to trade a lot of things if that is what the trade leader has decided to do. On the other hand, you may be able to acquire new things. You can put out commodities and or coins during the trade phase, so if you specialize, you have a lot of coins and not many commodities, and the player is in the opposite situation, you can balance things out. Very organic, very nuanced and multi-layered fun. The building phase, this is phenomenal, and again, it's so important to have the right turn to figure out ways of manipulating the order in which players go, because sometimes as the leader that decides the order in which players build things, sometimes you'll want to go last and see what the other opponents have done. Your neighbors haven't built armies, so they're still pretty weak. Then now you know that this turn you can concentrate on economy, on cities and temples. Everybody around you all of a sudden is arming themselves, knowing that when I go last as a trade leader is a good thing. On the other hand, you may have other times where you want to go first, because then you get to buy control on neutral regions before the opponents do. So everything is relative there, but clearly it is important to go first. So there are times where you're struggling to get to that point where you get that advantage. Going first in the move and battle phase, again, can be very useful, very important, or in a case, deciding who goes first. Sometimes you want to inflict a hit on the opponent because you have a bonus, for example, when attacking and not when defending. So if you know that there is going to be a confrontation, you can choose to go first, boom, and you do that. Other things, I don't know if that player who has promised to attack somebody else is really gonna do so. And knowing that, if that is true or not, there are other things that may happen, so I'm gonna let that player go first. So, choosing the order in which things happen is absolutely important. And again, there are the games where this is done, but this is done so elegantly in such a simple way, and yet it works so well. It brings so much stuff. It brings so much pleasant complexity to the design. I mean, I was involved. I was absorbed every minute of the game, and I played with 3 players and I played with 5 players. I haven't played with 4, but I love 3 and 5 desperately. It would be strange to me to discover the 4 is the unlucky number that doesn't work. And with 4, clearly the pace is much slower, but still it is more of a pace. You have more of a sense of a fluid experience. Then again, my comparison is always the same. Game of Thrones, the board game, where really I love the game, but you do not have much of a sense of progression. Something happens, players take their time, you're doing something else, like negotiating a deal, then somebody else does an action. You sometimes have a sense of disjointed action. Here, even with 5 players, when there is some downtime, the game feels like it's flowing much more organically and at a better pace. Why? Well, if nothing else, because I don't know when I'm gonna go next. If I'm not the leader in one of the categories, I may be really in tension because I really want to buy that wonder, and the trade leader and the culture leader keeps giving other players the option of buying stuff. So I'm really interested in seeing what they are doing, because I hope they're not buying that thing. If I am the leader, then I'm excited and interested because I want to see what other players are doing, and I'm devising my strategy to figure out the order in which I want to let other people go. The same with the combat phase. I may be on, in a 5-player game, I'm only being the active player 1/5 of the time, but I really want to see whether the players are maneuvering, what is it they're building, what is it that they're threatening, what is it that they're conquering, and so on and so forth. So even though there are times where it takes a while between the actions that you're actively taking, the fact that either you're planning what are the order of other players' activations, or you do not know when you're going to activate and what are the conditions by the time you activate, that keeps you interested, that keeps you involved, that kept me psychologically engaged with the design at all times. I just loved every aspect of it. Combat is simple but rewarding. It's a nice expression of the economy. You have to spend a lot of resources to get good legions, to get good fortifications, but then you also have to look at the geopolitics to decide how to deploy them, because in most cases you will not have enough resources to cover all of your fronts, so diplomacy and military have to go together. And again, combat is simple, but then when you add all of the bonuses that may come from the heroes, they come from the unique abilities of the various leaders, you have nuances, you have a lot of other factors that make combat, yes, super simple, but rewarding and very satisfying. Mare Nostrum Empires, to me, this is, I will say it explicitly, a masterpiece of a game. It combines the best of light wargaming with the best of medium weight Eurogaming, gives you economy, gives you warfare. It combines them very well. Potentially, yes, there may be a game in which you win without ever starting a battle and nobody attacks you ever, but since war is always an element there, it's always a threat, at least a part of your strategy will have been about how to deal with possible attacks. So the bellicose elements and the economic elements come together well. Unique characters, unique powers, a lot of customization available thanks to all the heroes. Everything plays in this game's favor. Everything contributes to make this game an absolutely memorable experience. I loved every game that I played of this game, and I keep playing it in the future because, trust me, this has to be one of the best games that I played in a very long time.